2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
What I would like to present you with, so I brought my script in order not to dwell on things too long, because I could talk for hours. So for more than 30 years, I work for Material and Information, MEZ, that is published by IBKA. I have posted more than 4,000 articles, and obviously I'm pretty familiar with the topic we're talking about. And the topic I would like to talk about now, what we just heard, matches very well, because at the end of the day, you need to come up with strategic considerations. So with regard to cosmovision or worldview, we find ourselves in a unique time. Never before religious communities shrank that much like the Christian churches in Europe since 1970. And there's no end to this kind of development. And there's considerable evidence that Christianity within the next 50 years will lose significance on our continent. Maybe there will be some exceptions, we'll see. So the question is, what are the consequences of this? And which are our conclusions that we need to draw if these theses are right? And I believe they are right, but these theses and prognoses that seem to me very secure need to be proven. And to prove this kind of thesis, you have three criteria with regard to sociology of religions. Well, basically, three areas of examination or assessment. First of all, the formal membership in religious communities gives an insight on their quantitative embedding in the population. And for politicians or for parties, this is an important figure. And the intensity of the bond with the church enables you to make a statement on the qualitative acceptance of the churches. So those who are a formal member of a church, in what way are they still convinced? And the third aspect is the attitude of the population with regard to central faith, questions of the faith. That would show in how far religious body of thought is still existing. But the problem is the two latter criteria would be the more important. So the last one, whether a religious body of thought is still existing, would be probably the most important question. But you can find out, have insights on that only by surveys. And the significance of surveys is limited. So, for example, if you ask the question if you believe in a higher being. In Germany, among 39 and 65% of the people agree to that question, depending on how it is expressed or formulated. And it seems that with regard to this kind of question, those who answer the questions are not always honest, but they say what others might like to hear. And at the same time, a lot of people don't have the theological knowledge in order to be able to answer to these questions in a differentiated way. For the normal people, religious, church, and Christian is the same, even though, there are significant differences. Also, the number of the members can only be registered in an exact way where it needs to be registered due to certain reasons, for example, with regard to church taxes. And this might be one of the reasons why especially Germany is such an interesting example in Europe, especially because we have the highest total population in Europe, And because Germany finds itself in a development with regard to cosmovision ranks in the middle, so to speak. And so Germany is a good representation. And the church tax has advantages. If the churches take care of getting them themselves, and if only those are registered with regard to church taxes who enter the church when they are old enough to decide and to opt for that, and not if they are just baptized as babies with water and become obliged to pay church taxes. But the church taxes, we find church tax in Austria and also in Switzerland. In Austria, the churches take care of the taxes, and this is why it is called contribution in Austria and not taxes, and the percentage is a little higher. And then we have church taxes in Sweden and in Denmark. And newly, in the last years, church taxes came up in Poland and in Hungary, but they are not that important for us. So for us here, it is important that we have an exact overview on how many people in our population belong to which group or to which cosmovision, and the non-religious do not have more than 30%, but 38.7%. So they increase in number. So we could also say those without religion or the non-religious people increase 0.5% every year, but I will come back to that later. And Estonia and the Czech Republic are way more secular than Germany. And similar to Eastern Germany, less than 1/3 or maybe only 1/4 of the population is part of a religious community. But that, as I said before, the quality of the bond to the church is important, because also Scandinavia is still considered a non-religious zone, even though around 70% belong to the Lutheran National Church. But this church doesn't have any religious significance. Just one example, in Sweden, the separation between state and religion was implemented in the year 2000 because the Lutheran National Church, in the Synod, 2/3 voted for it, and there was the simple majority, but not the 2/3 majority, that in Sweden only people have to pay church taxes who is baptized as of age 16, and also he declared as an adult that he entered the church. If we would do that here in Germany, the church among 2 generations would shrink to the size of a small sect. On the other hand, we have 2 states that in former times were very Catholic, and religiosity shrank a lot during the last years. It's Belgium and Ireland, and the first state in Belgium, you see that with in the regulation with regard to assisted suicide, that goes also for young people. And in Ireland, the share of the faithful Christian shrank within 7 years between 2005 and 2012 by 1/3, from 69% to 46%. This is due to the fact that the young generation in Ireland is way more non-religious than in any other country, and also due to the fact that the medium generation, especially in the cities, is fed up with what is happening in the Irish monastery and parish houses. And you can't compare that with the German situation. The situation there is way worse. And this has consequences, and we see this tonight also in the election, probably when it comes to the vote with regard to the homo marriage. And people who did not study the recent developments would be surprised. But let's stay in Germany. First of all, I would like to talk about statistical developments of the formal members of the church. Let's compare the situation of 1950, 70, 90, and 2010. In the first 2 years that I mentioned, a census was carried out in Eastern and Western Germany. 1990 was the year of the unification, and 2010 matches exactly. So it's 20 years later. In 1950, during the census, almost exactly 95% of the German, including the GDR, were Catholic or Protestant. It was more than 90% even in the GDR. In 1970, the share in Germany was at 87%, so it was insignificantly smaller or lower. But between 1970 and 1990, the churches lost in only 2 decades 1/6 of their share and sank to 72.5%. A little bit more in the east than the west, but a significant drop down also there. This is also about the 68 movement, obviously. But something that is really astonishing is that in the following decades, so the first 2 decades after the unification, the churches lost the same share again, so 1/5 of the rest. So within 4 decades, and this is just a blink of an eye with regard to history, they lost 1/3 of their members, from 87 to 58%. So exactly 1/3. And this alone would be remarkable, because losing 500,000 members every year since 1990, and every year, so this means between 1990 and 2010, from 58 to 48 million. I mean, that's quite something. But the real catastrophe started in the year 2000, and a lot of people did not really realize yet what happened. Because up to then, the downward spiral was connected to the number of people leaving the church. But the number of the people who left the church stabilized since 1995 on a level of 120,000 every year. So every church lost 120,000 people, and the people who entered the church were already deducted. So this is not that much. So 24 million people, it would just be 0.5% every year. I mean, this is not that small a figure. So in 10 years, that would be 5%. In 10 years, 10%. So that wouldn't be that small a figure. But in an overall perspective, it would be an undelightful but a bearable deficit. But since the year 2000, or even a little earlier, every year the losses increased when you compare the newly baptized with the deceased members. Officially, people underline that also the birth rate went down, and the fact was dismissed as a demographic factor. But this is wrong. So we have 680,000 newborns and 580,000 people who die. So that would work if you don't read the statistic, because if you read the statistic, you have to pay attention, because you only see the number of the funeral. But what they don't say is that 20% of the people who belong to the Protestant church don't have a religious funeral anymore. So they don't mention these numbers. They only compare the number of funerals with the newly baptized people, but you would need to see the overall number of deceased people. So I calculated that for the year 2010, and so I just asked the question of 100 people who died, how many are Catholic or Protestant, and how many babies are baptized out of 100? So if you calculate also those who are baptized when they are already children, so up to their 14th birthday. In 2010, of 172 were Catholic or Protestant, and of 100 newborn, 58. So you have a deficit of 21%. And I examined the figures for the year 2000, and in both areas it was only, the numbers were higher, it was only 16%. And then I went to the year 1991. I could not compare it with 1990 because that was the year of the unification. And in 1991 it was 13%, and I have the latest numbers of the Protestant church, and now it's only 48%. So 48% of the newly born babies are baptized. And this means the church loses more members than by people leaving the church. And this is a catastrophe, because it's just a question of calculation. You can, turn the trend of people leaving the church, theoretically. This will not happen in the upcoming 2 decades, because the church carried out surveys, and something very astonishing come up. 4 million people say regularly that they would like to leave the church in the upcoming future or immediately, but actually only 300,000 people do it every year. But we know that of those who have the intention to do so, 70% actually do it. So 1 million says yes 100%, and 2/3 of the 4 million, so that would be 3 million people who are going to leave the church. And 400 of them actually leave the church, of those who say so. So what is happening in people who every month pay €50 church tax for many years, even though they have nothing to do with the church anymore and they would like to leave the church? If you tell the same people, just burn every month a €50 note, they would say you're crazy. But just because they don't think about it, they pay taxes to the church. But we know that also in the next 2 decades, there will be more or less the same number of people leaving the church like they did now. And the aging will continue. And it will get worse for the churches if we take a look at the reasons for the aging of the church population. As I said before, the people leaving the church are not so many, but about 3/4 of the people leaving the church are below age 35. So it is the young people who are the majority of those leaving the church. And it is this age group, so people below age 35 who decide whether they have their children baptized or not. So, as I said before, 0.5% of the people belonging to the church leave the church per year. But in the age group 20 to 30, it's 2%. So in 10 years, 20% of the people leave, 1/5. And up to 35, given that the trend does not change, only after the age of 35. So if the trend continues that way for 2 generations, so those who were a member of the church at age 20, 1/3 will leave them will have left once these people are 30. Then the churches are done. And the same goes for all the countries, so not only for Germany, but also for Austria and Switzerland, and also for the 2 Scandinavian countries. The aging process increases. We have also one example where this happened already. The Anglican Church, especially in England, not in Wales, not in North Ireland, not elsewhere, but in England, that they are basically dead already because there are really old people going to church anymore. And, this is a threat to young people. They don't like it. So the life of the church is already dying.
Das ist vielleicht schon mal sicher, was noch natürlich klar ist.
And another aspect, I don't know if I mentioned that before already, with regard to the aging process, this kind of development could only be reversed within several decades if it would be possible to reverse it. Because theoretically it is possible that there would be less people leaving the church. Like in 2006, with the euphoria with regard to the Pope, there were less people leaving in Germany as well as in Austria and in Switzerland. But after that, it increased again. And now we saw a lot of people leaving the church due to the fact because the church tax was expanded to the capital return.
Zum Teil. Also jedenfalls das, was mehr dran ist. Ja, nun passen dazu auch die kircheninternen Studien.
So if you take a look now at the studies within the church with regard to the weakening bond to the church within the young generations, I would like to dwell on that only briefly because everybody knows that only 10% of the Catholics and 3% of the Protestants go to church on Sunday. So 20 years ago it was four times as many people. And with the Protestant church, so a theologian and pastor I know, who he died recently, he called 95% of the Protestant members of the church as baptized non-Christians. And there is a remarkable study of the evangelical church in Germany called Commitment and Indifference. So every 10 years they carry out a study like that, and they came up with the following results. The younger their members are, the smaller or the weaker the connection or the bond to the church is. And among the 14 to 21-year-olds, every fifth would like to leave the church, even though this age group does not pay church taxes. And with regard to aging, we also see that the churches will lose the young people. And this study has also another result. The church, and this is something that was really frustrating for them, they carried out this survey among Protestants and 1,500 non-religious, and what they realized is that the non-religious are not open. They cannot address them with their way of talking in the theologian terms and with their different types of approach. So there's no interest in getting into contact with the church. So the single cases that are published where somebody who was non-religious enters the church, these are really rare exceptions. So they're published just to have some news. And as a conclusion, I would like to read out something to you that the spokesperson of the Protestant Central Office for Value Quarters said in the issue April 2014 under the title "Goodbye from the Megatrend Religion." So this is somebody who's an expert and who should encourage the churches. He says that the latest survey are really shocking. After starting with the year 2000, people wrote a lot about a return of the religion. Also, the evangelical church in Germany based a lot of things on this thesis. And now we see that we are wrong. And the vice president of the evangelical church in Germany should be honored because he was honest enough to say the truth that this was an error, to believe that there would be a return of the religion. And obviously, also at the universities, there's a religions theology that is based on betraying yourself. And in our society, there is an expanding attitude of atheism that cannot be denied anymore. To get in touch with those who don't have a religion will not work if you try to tell them that they are basically also religious people, because religion is an anthropological basic factor. So this is the quote. I will not continue to read this quote out to you, but this is very clear. But it would be wrong, just not to do anything and just to wait for the development. So we need a reorientation that I just depicted. And the elderly people, the older generation, did not even register or did realize that people go for different ways and reorient themselves. So there are two things that we need to do. And the first one I have been pushing forward a lot for the last years. And what I think is necessary is to create awareness among the politicians for these figures. Because politicians are always interested when it comes to getting voters. And if you see that in Bavaria, that was like really a role model with regard to religion. Only 1% of the people are convinced Protestants and 8.5% are convinced Catholics. So 10%, so even a party like the CSU, cannot be successful because they only have these few percent. But if there are so many people who are don't belong to a religious community or are non-religious, this is a threat for them. I believe that the CSU will realize that way easier than for example, the Social Democrats, who are always late in realizing things like that. And I would come back to that idea that we just heard. And even though I'm a member of Die Linke, or still a member, I have to say, I also come closer to the point where I say, basically, what we have to do
deutlich machen, dass wir
is
eigentlich
to
nur Wählerstimmen gewinnen
create
können, wenn
awareness
sie
among the politicians that they can
die
only
Klientel, die
gain
wachsende Klientel der Konfessionslosen
the
stärker
voters
berücksichtigen.
if
Und
they
dass zum Beispiel
focus
C-Parteien
also
sowieso
on
den
the
Großteil
target
der
group of the
Kirchentreuen
non-religious.
sicher hat und die
And
anderen
given that the
Parteien, eigentlich
CSU,
die SPD, gerade diese
the
Kirchentreuen sowieso
Christian,
nur zum kleinen Teil kriegen
so
können.
the
Aber wenn die nicht einsichtig
CSU
sind, dann muss es
can
eine solche
rely
Partei wie
on
die
the
Humanisten
Christians.
geben,
We
allein
need a
damit
party
man
like the
damit drohen
humanists,
kann, wenn ihr euch
if only
nicht
to be a
Gewährer der
threat if you
Konfessionsfreien
don't take
bemüht,
care
muss es eine
of the
Alternative
voters
geben.
who belong to the
Und,
non-religious
ich bin auch sehr stark am Überlegen,
area.
dass ich habe
You
mal so
will
eine
lose.
humanistische Initiative, so ein
Once upon a time, I
abgedruckt, hatten
started, I published a
und es muss mit
humanistic
Sicherheit,
program, and I
eine
was really delighted by that
Alternative
program. We need an
damit
alternative to make
die
sure
politischen
that
Parteien
the political
spuren.
parties,
Es ist ähnlich wie bei den
move
Grünen
ahead.
seinerzeit.
And at the
Als die
time with the
Grünen
Green Party,
hochgekommen
when the Green Party
haben plötzlich die anderen Parteien die
started,
Umwelt
the
entdeckt.
other parties
Als die
discovered
Linke
the environment.
etwas
When Die
etwas
Linke,
zugelegt
so
hat,
the
hat
left
plötzlich die
party,
SPD
increased in
wiederentdeckt,
members and
auch
voters,
andere
the
Parteien, dass sie
SPD
eigentlich das Beiwort sozial
realized
in ihrem
that
Namen
they
haben.
have
Und es ist
social
ganz klar,
in their
wenn eine
name,
Partei
the word
der
social in their
Humanisten
name. And it's obvious, if
mehr
there was a
Stimmen
party
kriegt, dann
of
könnte
the
es
humanists, and
durchaus
if
sein,
they
dass
would
plötzlich
gain
andere
voters, it
Parteien
might
ganz
be
schnell
that other
eine
parties
saubere
very soon
Trennung von Staat und Kirche zumindest ein
come up
bisschen näher
with
kommen.
favoring
Gut, aber
the
das soll dann
separation
auch
of
Gegenstand
state
der
and
Diskussion
religion. And that should be also part of our discussion now. Thank you very much.
Gut, wenn es ein paar Fragen gibt. Ich
If
möchte
there are
vielleicht auch
questions,
eins sagen. Ich
I
habe mir
will be
überlegt,
pleased to
ob ich
answer.
das, auch noch sage, also in Europa gibt es natürlich in
In
einzelnen Staaten
Europe,
sehr
in
unterschiedliche
the different countries, there are
Modelle.
many different models.
Das ist, ich habe ein
I just
paar
wanted to add
erwähnt.
that. I mentioned a few of
Beispielsweise
them.
noch heute ist
For instance,
Religion dort wieder im
Religion
Kommen.
is
Siehe Russland, siehe Ukraine,
gaining
siehe Ungarn,
importance in
wo
Russia,
der
Ukraine,
Nationalismus
in
im
Hungary,
Kommen ist,
where
der oft
nationalism
gepaart
is
ist
on
mit
the upswing
faschistoiden
and is
Einsprengseln.
always going
Es war
along
auch
with
früher schon so
fascist
in Portugal,
characteristics. And in the past, for
in
instance, in
Spanien,
Portugal, in Spain,
waren die faschistischen Diktatoren
the
Salazar und
fascist
Franco sehr eng
dictators
mit der
Salazar
katholischen
and
Kirche
Franco
verbunden,
were
hat
clearly
übrigens
associated with the Catholic
unterschiedliche
Church
Folgen
very
gehabt.
closely with
In
different
Spanien ist die
impacts.
Bevölkerung
In
sehr
Spain,
säkular.
the
Vergleichsweise hat sogar
population is very
jetzt eine
secular.
liberale Abtreibung,
They even have
Abtreibungsregelung
liberalized
oder die Beibehaltung dieser
abortion.
Regelung durchgesetzt, sogar gegen die
It will be
konservative
maintained
Regierung.
at least,
In
even in the face of the
Portugal
conservative
haben wir ein
government.
System der sauberen
In
Trennung von
Portugal,
Staat
there's a
und
clear
Kirche
separation of the
eigentlich,
church
aber
and
dort ist
state,
die Bevölkerung ungleich
but the
frömmer.
population
Also
is
nicht immer
much more religious.
sind gesetzliche Regelungen
It's not always the case that
Überzeugung der Bevölkerung,
legislation and the
im
people's
Gleichklang.
convictions are uniform. That's what I just wanted to add. My name is Büchner. I'm a member of IBKA and GBS. I would like to make a remark adding to the figures you've mentioned. You mentioned 3 to 4 million people who would like to leave church, but there are only 300 to 400,000 people who really leave the church. So we have to take into account that in Germany there are several million of people who work for the work in institutions where the church is the employer, and they couldn't have left the church because they would have lost their job. And there's also pressure coming from the families, the grandparents, etc., who really want to take away the heritage. If people leave, their descendants leave the church. So it's roughly 1 million of people who work in church-operated institutions or organizations. I mean, I'm not speaking of the person taking care of the priest's household, but I'm speaking of other institutions or entities. There are people who would like to leave the church, but it's not the vast majority. A large part is due to the fact that only 1/4 of the church members do pay church tax. In the past, it amounted to 40%, and now the number has decreased because out of those who leave the church, the vast majority said, I am not interested in the church anymore. But if I have to pay the church, I have to pay taxes, I'm going to leave quickly. But if I didn't have to pay tax, I wouldn't drop out, because I don't have a disadvantage by being a member.
Mein Name ist Ralf Würfel,
I'm Ralf Würfel, GBS OBL. With a lot of concern, I'm witnessing what's happening in the evangelical church. Have you analyzed that as well, in particular the Evangelical Alliance? Are there also figures or trends you could give us, particularly with regard to the mega churches and the big festivals where many young people go to? Well, you have to consider the share. What percentage are we talking about? For media reason, this figure of many thousands of people were mentioned, but if you check the percentage of young people, the number is really very, very low. And in the evangelical scene, there's always a series of church that grows quickly, but starting at a very low level. Even if it's 5 times more, it's hardly measurable. Whereas there are other evangelical churches or groupings that just disappear again. So there's a kind of migration from one group to another. Speaking in figures, all the evangelical groups or the fringe groups at the edge of the church, the number of members amounts to 500,000, not even. And there's one church that has 2 different groups. There's a very special liberal Protestants free church that's also part of it, it's also included. I wouldn't overestimate this. And there's one big difference. The 2 churches have such a lot of power because they have a state-supporting function. We all know that the parties always praise the informed citizen, but they want to have the passive and inactive citizen. And they need the church because the church teaches the people to obey, as they hope. The churches don't always do that anymore, but it's the expectation of the state vis-à-vis the church. And the evangelical churches are not suited to that. They are an outsider group, and the state will never court them, and they will never be able to impose themselves in legislation, for instance. Good evening. I'm BKA-Convention of the Party of Humanists. I think that you gave really impressive figures when you spoke about the number of people who want to leave the church and the number of people who drop out between 20 and 30 are not getting baptized. I didn't know these figures, but I realized that there are many people who are still part of the church and are atheists and think they are doing something good by being part of the church, by investing the church tax to social purposes. But I also find it interesting that many people leave the church or grow up without a denomination, but still think that the church is a positive power in society. And they are in favor of the privileges and the financial support to the churches. Is there any empiric evidence or any statistics among the non-denominational people? You can even include the sects and the few Muslims. There are clearly less Muslims in Germany than you often hear. 5% is said. That's clearly exaggerated. In the census,
plötzlich ja 1,5 Millionen
1.5 million people were suddenly missing, and 1.2 million people were people coming from Muslim countries who had traveled back to their countries without giving notice in Germany. So this means the figure amounts to 2.5 to 3 million, so it's 3.5% of Muslims in Germany. But when we speak of people who are not part of the two big churches, we can say that 15% are convinced Christians. This also includes the small Christian groups. The New Apostolic are the biggest group, I think 500,000 members. But officially there are 1.4 million baptized people, baptized Orthodox. But they don't pay church tax, and so they can't leave the church. It's impossible. And that's the best proof for the fact that leaving the church means just dropping out of paying tax. If there is no tax, whenever there's no tax, you can't leave. And out of the figure I've just given you, 100,000 to 200,000 are active Orthodox, but we can say 15% are Christians, 15% are others, these are also esoteric people, and 15% are real atheists, non-denominational and non-religious. And to put it differently, in the last few years, also within the church, the share of those has increased who don't believe anything at all, but are still part of the church. The main motive is indeed the one. They say, if I don't have to pay church tax, nothing happens to me and the rest doesn't interest me. The people in Eastern Germany are a good example. They grew up without religion and the churches really have a hard time there. But the sociologists in religion say that the people forgot that they are atheists. They are atheists, but it doesn't play a role anymore. And there are also people inside the church who don't care. I met people who really didn't remember whether they had left the church or if they hadn't. They didn't pay tax, so it didn't matter to them. But there's a trend. There's a trend that there's no longer this distinction who is part of the church is faithful and who isn't is non-faithful. This distinction can't be made that much anymore as it could be made 20 or 30 years ago. Very well. If there are other questions, I'm here for the weekend. And we can talk, and I can also recommend you the MEZ magazine. It's worthwhile reading. And also, if you're not an IBKA member, you should read that on a regular basis. It's worthwhile reading it.